Even though it sits technically within the realm of science fiction, the Fallout games give us a plethora of fantastical creatures that we can transplant into Dungeons & Dragons. From the juvenile hatchlings to the kaiju level queens. Mirelurks are one of the most well recognized threats, plaguing Fallout players from New Vegas to the Commonwealth to the Capital Wasteland. So if you want to use these monsters in your Dungeons & Dragons campaign, we're going to have to do some homebrewing. Hi everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Nazir North, and in this video we are going to convert the Mirelurks from the Fallout games into homebrew stat blocks for Dungeons & Dragons. Let's get started. Mirelurks are a common yet surprisingly tough hazard to deal with as you wander the radioactive wastelands of the post-apocalyptic United States. They tend to live near water around lakes, riverbeds, swamps and sewers, and they are considered a pest of the apocalyptic world and can be quite difficult to deal with in combat. I've homebrewed up a number of variants to reflect the different types of Mirelurks we see in the Fallout games, mainly using Fallout 4 for reference. So let's get started with your run-of-the-mill basic Mirelurk. The Mirelurk is a large monstrosity that is unaligned. You could make the case for it being a beast rather than a monstrosity, but I personally think that monstrosity fits better for this. It is not just a giant crab, which would be a beast. It's a giant crab that is warped and twisted into something unnatural by magical means, or at least Fallout magic, in other words, radiation. It's got a good armor class of 17 and a decent pool of hit points. You will know if you've played the games, these are pretty tanky creatures. I've given it an average move speed, but also a swimming speed of 30 feet. If you watch them in-game, they can swim just about as quickly as the player can, so I think 30 feet is appropriate there. It's got a good strength and constitution, average dexterity, and then low mental ability scores, typical of other monstrosity type creatures. I've also given it dark vision, as it operates completely normally at nighttime and swims deep underwater where you'd expect it to be dark, so I think it makes sense for them. It's got the amphibious trait, so it can breathe in air and water, and then I've also created two new traits specifically for the Mirelurk. The first is natural camouflage, mimicking the behaviour we see of the Mirelurk in the game. This allows it to dig a small burrow and partially hide within it, popping out again when enemies are nearby. While in its burrow, it's not invisible, though creatures within 20 feet who have a passive perception score of 14 or higher will still be able to spot the Mirelurk's shell poking out of the ground. The next trait, which is again designed to mimic the behaviour of the Mirelurks we see in the Fallout games, I've called Protective Shell. Mirelurks are hard to damage, particularly when they charge at you and they put their heads down, exposing pretty much only their hard exterior shell, protecting their underside. This makes attacks against moving Mirelurks have a disadvantage. This, in effect, is only really going to apply to opportunity attacks made against the Mirelurk as it is scuttling away to a different target. Its actions are pretty straightforward. It's got a multi-attack which is composed of 2 claw strikes. But it does have a unique reaction, which is to withdraw partially into its shell, increasing its AC by 4 until the start of its next turn. This is a little bit like the shield spell, but not quite as strong. Although this is a fairly simple creature to use, this balances out at around a challenge rating 3. It's pretty tough in melee combat. Just like in the Fallout games, I would use these in Dungeons & Dragons as the Dungeon Master in groups of maybe 3 or 4 as a minimum, probably also combined with a few other Mirelurk types, which we'll get to in a moment. I don't think they'll do incredibly well as solo monsters to pit against a low-level party. I see them more of a swarming nuisance for mid to high level play. Okay, moving on, let's get one of the simple variants out of the way before we get on to the more interesting stuff. This is the Mirelurk hatchling. These guys are just like tiny, bug-like baby Mirelurks that sometimes pop out of eggs and attack from the moment they're born. Not a lot to say about these guys just from looking at the stat block there. They've got a 1/8 challenge rating and a very basic bite attack. However, these guys will become relevant when we get to the Myer Queen later on. Okay, next up we have the Mirelurk Hunter. anatomically, this thing is far more like a lobster than a crab. It doesn't have the protection of that hard shell on its back, although it does still have a decent armor class. I've given it 15, so a little lower than the base Mirelurk, but still okay. It does, however, have a few more hit points. This version still has the claw attack, although it does a bit more damage, and it has its signature ranged ability, which is an acid spray. This is a 30-foot line acid attack, mechanically identical to a Black Dragon's breath weapon with one addition of my own. If you fought these things in Fallout 4, you'll know why they are such a pain to deal with. It's because their acid attacks stick to you and do damage over time. So that's what we have here as well. Creatures that fail their saving throw against the attack take an additional amount of acid damage each round until they use their action to wipe the acid off, or until 1 minute has passed. With some increased offensive abilities and a greater damage output potential, this pushes the Mirelurk Hunter up to a challenge rating of 4. Alright, those are your basic grunt Mirelurk variants out of the way. Let's move on to royalty. Let's have a look at the Mirelurk King. I won't lie, in the Fallout games, these guys are weird. They are more like swamp monsters than the crustaceans that we see in the Mirelurk and the Mirelurk Hunter. In fact, the Mirelurk Kings are fairly humanoid in appearance, like fishmen, and they run pretty quickly on all fours. They are unarmoured, so they're a bit easier to hit than the other Mirelurk variants, but they do have more hit points. They are also just medium in size, so smaller than the Mirelurk and the Mirelurk Hunter. The Mirelurk Kings definitely do not fulfill that role of tank like the base Mirelurk does. The Kings are strikers. They hit fast and they hit hard. Their base speed is 40 feet, and then they can hit twice with their claws, which do more damage than the other variants. They also have a unique attack that I've called Sonic Blast. In the Fallout games, the Mirelurk Kings can use this kind of ranged attack, which can disorient and confuse the player. This attack here is based on a Constitution saving throw and deals thunder damage, as it's a sound-based attack. And on a failed save, the creature is also stunned until the end of its next turn. Altogether, this ramps these guys up to a challenge rating of 6. In combat, as it's a king, I would never use more than one of these guys in a single encounter. Just mix one Mirelurk King in with some other Mirelurk variants. Okay, last stat block to look at, and it is the star of the show. It is the Mirelurk Queen. Mirelurk Queens are massive, have huge pools of health, and are really difficult to take down. And one wrong move and she will tear you to pieces or melt you with her acid spray. On the stat block I've made, the Mirelurk Queen is gargantuan in size with good physical ability scores, particularly that strength and constitution. She has an armor class of 16 and 248 hit points, and is a challenge rating 20 legendary monster. This is a late game boss. On traits we have Amphibious, as we've given to all of the Mirelurk variants, and she has 3 uses of legendary resistance. We also have the Spawning trait, which is a unique one that I've made for this monster specifically. If the Mirelurk Queen takes more than 20 damage in a single turn, she releases 2d8 eggs, half of which immediately hatch into Mirelurk hatchlings. The unhatched eggs just remain on the ground. That will be relevant for later on. She has a multi-attack, once again using a claw, although this variant does a lot more damage with that melee attack. She then also has a massively buffed up version of the Mirelurk Hunter's acid spray, just like the Mirelurk Queens in the Fallout 4 game do. Now, as a bonus action, the Mirelurk Queen can let out a screech to hatch nearby unhatched eggs. This will apply not just to the eggs that she has dropped, but any others that might be in nearby nests just out in the environment. She also has a simple reaction which increases her deadliness in melee, allowing for a free claw attack as a reaction once another creature hits her in melee range. As a legendary creature, she of course has 3 legendary actions with the options as follows. Another basic claw attack, an egg barrage, which launches eggs up to 50 feet away, half of which instantly hatch. The Mirelurk Queens in Fallout 4 do exactly this when the player is far away. They spam their acid attack and occasionally literally just throw eggs at you. It's pretty comical. Then the last legendary action is a roar, just like the Mirelurk Queens do in the game when they first emerge and attack the player. This alerts any Mirelurks within 500 feet that that queen is in danger and calls them to come and help. The final piece of information here when running Mirelurks in D&D is this little sidebar explaining how the eggs work, which is particularly pertinent for the Mirelurk Queen. Essentially, each nest has 2d4 plus 2 eggs in it, and nests could be scattered around the battlefield. If a non-Mirelurk touches an egg, half of the eggs in that nest immediately hatch and defend themselves. Once the battle is over, assuming every single Mirelurk wasn't destroyed, any survivors collect up the unhatched eggs and return them to their nests. So here we have 5 different types of Mirelurks that you can insert into your Dungeons & Dragons game. They are going to work best when you combine the different variants into one group in one combat encounter and have them all up against the players at once. Maybe a Mirelurk King stalking the perimeter of an area, attacking first as a scout. Then, as the party get closer to the location, a mix of Mirelurks and Mirelurk hunters confront them, likely in an area with a few nests scattered around. Then, finally, as they approach the lair and the queen, they are confronted by more regular Mirelurks defending their queen, along with plenty of nests nearby where swarms and swarms of hatchlings emerge. I think that could be a pretty cool encounter. In Fallout 4 and some of the other Fallout games, you also occasionally have these glowing variants of certain monsters, reflecting those which have taken on increasing amounts of mutating radiation. If that's something you'd like to add in too for an additional bit of difficulty, by sprinkling in the occasional glowing Mirelurk for example, or maybe even a glowing Mirelurk Queen, then you can use this variant rule that I've added. Glowing monsters essentially deal some extra poison damage on a hit, and creatures that end their turn within 5 feet of a glowing monster take some additional poison damage each round. I was on the fence about whether radiation damage should be poison or radiant, but I think poison just makes more sense, as we can also give the glowing creatures a poison immunity to both poison damage and the poisoned condition. As always, I'll leave a link in the description for where you can find these stat blocks to use in your own Dungeons & Dragons campaigns. And let me know, what kind of homebrews would you like to see next? I've already had a play around with some of the pals from Pal World and that was good fun, and we've also done the horror themed homebrew in the video on the Bagman. So maybe some more monsters from Fallout, perhaps the Deathclaw or maybe the Feral Ghouls, or something else. Leave a comment if you've got any suggestions. And remember, please hit that like button if you've enjoyed this one, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this popping up on your YouTube feed. Cheers everyone, thank you for watching, I'll see you next time.